I think even asking the models to reduce their own token charges, they'll do that too, which is fascinating also, right? So you can say build this with the least number of tokens, but like when token maxing started, I would have just told it like write code without arrays. You imagine how much code you would write to like read in a file into memory. You have to write one line for each line of the file. I mean, you'd use a massive amount of tokens and generate a huge amount of code. And so I think that's exactly the wrong thing to be asking is use them. You want to be asking, get this done with the least amount of tokens, but do it well with the least amount of tokens is what you should be focused on.
Welcome back to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor, Jean-Pierre Ruth. Today's episode, we are talking about, well, let's call it the AI recalculation. Have chief C-suite tech leaders had to rethink their AI strategies as certain costs start to creep up and maybe even escalate in certain ways. We've seen trends such as token maxing, at least for a particular period of time, slap companies in the face with unexpected bills for their AI resources that they were probably in a rush to use at first. There have also been some questions about overall expenses that could be tied to how AI is being implemented versus the people and resources that organizations might have sought to replace. So how do CTOs, CIOs, look at these plans and weigh their returns and outcomes if the AI that they're using is getting overshadowed by the costs that they're incurring? For today's episode, we are joined by Bill Vass, CTO for Booz. Bill, good to be seeing you.
Good to see you. Thanks.
And a returning guest of the show, Ameya Kanitkar, CTO for Larridin. Ameya, good to see you again.
Great to see you. Thanks for inviting us.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about, for both of you, how do you look at your strategic plans for AI these days? Have there been dramatic shifts in the way that you have been looking at it, say, from 3 years ago to 2 years ago to last year? Bill, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, we started on doing what we called agent-oriented architecture about 2 years ago at Booz Allen. That was before the word agentic existed, and we built the first agent systems, built our own MPC server before we know to call it an MPC server, our own static memory systems. We've, of course, adopted the open source versions of that. And we were really early to the game. We have literally hundreds of production systems now with thousands of agents in operation. So we also were early on adopting, Claude for coding. And so that's a core piece for us. But we also started at the very beginning, making sure we were model agile. So we could switch to any model at any time. And if a model had a security issue, we could switch. If a model had a political issue, we could switch. If a model had a cost issue, we could switch. And so more and more, we're using Nemotron as an open source model to reduce our overall costs as well. So we kind of do a mix of models based on need and capability. So we'll mostly use like Claude for coding. Another thing that we've seen a transformation on is this new idea that the new programming language isn't Python or Java or things like that. It's English. And so more and more, we're doing a lot of symphonic development and spec-driven development, which is really just programmers being able to create very complex, if you like, prompting, but much more than just prompting, but building complex textual libraries from mission understanding of what needs to be done, and then working in cooperation with agents that are operating, kind of like claws, if you like, involved. So we're using NemoClaw, we're doing a bunch of those kinds of things, and so more and more, we do certainly track tokens. We're generating millions of lines of code per month right now with AI at the back end. So we track those things, but those are not the metrics we use. We focus much more on what I would call, ROI based metrics where we can, and those are very hard to measure. Basically, they've always been hard to measure, right? This is new to AI, right? It's always been hard. So results of the services are where a lot of our focus is right now. And how do we get into new markets faster? How do we deploy faster? Those kinds of things.
Ameya, how about on your end?
Awesome. It resonates a lot, Bill, with what you just said. Larridin as a company, we help other companies actually measure impact of AI. So we are in a unique position to see across the cross section of enterprises, across different verticals and different places. And there are like from all this data, we are seeing a lot of the things Bill said, but here is kind of the summary that we see it. I think at this point, it's very hard to say like 2 years plan or a 3 year, like that's actually a very long horizon, 2 weeks if you're lucky, maybe 2 months, right? So the horizon is changing, but in the last 6 to 8 months, significant changes have happened. The first and the most important is that around December, January, once these models got better and once the adoption went through the roof, I would say last year, this time, the adoption was probably 20%, 30% in engineering. Now it's 90% plus across the companies, across the enterprises, including the coding agent adoptions, and not just the cursors of the world. The costs have generally gone up about 10x since the beginning of this year, especially in engineering. So the 10x cost increase actually have multiple ramifications, and we can talk about that. But one of the big ramifications is that now those are part of labor budgets. Those are not part of software budgets because they're essentially competing with labor budgets because we are well beyond the software budgets territory. The productivity is up about 1.5x since the beginning of the year. It's kind of hard to measure, but we kind of actually specialize in that. But it's about up 50%. But the costs are up 10x, so the productivity is not up 10x, right? In fact, we are seeing in the last couple of months the costs are going up, but the productivity has actually plateaued. So those are some very interesting observations, and there are a lot of ramifications on that. We can talk about it, the solutioning piece, but those are some early observations.
Yeah, we're still seeing rework rates of 20 to 40%, depending on how good the engineer is in using it. So I think that's a ways too. But I think we're addressing the costs by moving to Nemotron, and the models they're trained on open source data. They're not trained on the stuff that I have to worry about in drone operations or tactical operations or intelligence operations. So the amount of data that is necessary is beyond the ragging capabilities of the model. So I have to do model extension. I have to do vector databases and a whole bunch of other stuff on top of that, and that's expensive. But we also see things. We had one customer, they were token maxing. They were like, "Look how proud I am! I'm using up all my," and they were running out of tokens. They would buy like $2 million worth, and they'd be out in a month. And they asked us, well, what's causing our tokens to go away? And we did an analysis, and their end users were asking the weather like several times a day. What's the weather going to be tomorrow? Which I guess they get from their Alexas at home and things like that. They don't realize that's thousands of tokens to go out to the internet, look the weather up, come back and tell you that, right? So I think there's a lot of that, trying to understand, how wasting tokens like that is a big problem. And I think, you really have to think about this too, because, I think I agree with them. I mean, that we're certainly seeing the productivity increases about the same, that you're talking about 1.5. So we look at about 22 to 25% increase, which is very similar numbers. And of course, I just see, like, all of the times I've been through these technology changes, we're just going to do more. I don't have less people. We're going to do a lot more, right? Which is great too, right? You're going to do a lot more. Your ability to express intent with each technical advance, from the time when I used to write machine code, and then the first, like Fortran was an amazing invention, like as opposed to assembly language, right? And then, you get to each thing, and then object oriented, and then web services, and now AI. These are all step functions improvements in your ability to express intent. But in each of those cases, we didn't have less programmers, we always had more. And I think this is just another example of we'll do a lot more. It's because the demand is infinite, right? So I think we'll do a lot more. Each programmer will do a lot more. Each mission expert will do a lot more. Each business expert will do a lot more. And we'll just continue to get better at doing that. But I think, looking at things like your mix of models so that you can reduce your cost as well. We primarily run on Bedrock. I'm former AWS, so that's what we run on, also for the security and the guardrails and all those kinds of things. And Bedrock's not free either, right? So you need I can see even companies having a mix of some on-prem hardware again to handle, token charges, and then just use the really big models when they need to. And I think that's going to be this mixture of expert models and different models. And then you're going to have a layer of AI that decides which models you use. Like, oh, that's a hard problem, I'm going to call Claude. Oh, that's an easy problem, I'm going to use, this other model, this tiny model here. And, oh, that's a medium problem, I'm going to use Nemotron. And that's what I think we're starting to see, at least in our businesses that we're working on.
Gotcha. So let's talk about how you individually are kind of like progressing your plans within your organizations. Are you looking at taking small steps with AI at this point? Are you looking at taking major leaps with what you want to do next with how you are introducing or building up the resources within your organizations? Ameya, if you could lead us off with your thoughts.
Yeah. I think the biggest change between sort of 6 months ago or 4 months ago to now is that people are very, very aware of the costs. Like cost equation now is like 3-4 months ago, people like just use it, whether you call it token maxing or not, we just use it, right? And maybe that was the right thing to do because you wanted to see it's such a big change in the technology that you wanted to make sure everybody uses it. But now the cost is becoming a very critical equation of this. People are very aware of the ROI. They are very aware of, okay, what am I actually getting for it? Or at least it's top of mind. If they have not solved it, at least it's top of mind. The couple of big changes that we are seeing here is that we actually mapped a productivity on one axis and cost on another axis. And we saw a graph like this. Essentially, there comes a point where productivity goes up, cost goes up. And at a point, after which point the cost goes up, but the productivity doesn't, right? So after that point, the cost keeps going up, but the productivity is barely moving up. And when we actually mapped that, the area under the curve, we actually found out that after that inflection point, almost 30 to 40% of the costs are up beyond that point. So a lot of times our recommendation is to find that point for you in your company and put a limit there. By just doing that, you're not giving up any productivity gains and you're cutting down costs right there and there, 30, 40%. So that's one. The second is that while I agree with Bill on sort of using American models and all those things, because these Claude and OpenAI models are so expensive, especially once you're on pure API usage, subscriptions are cheap, but outside of subscriptions, these are really expensive. There is a more willingness to use open weight models. And this is a significant shift from the DeepSeek movement we had last year. So when last year we had customers coming to us and say, hey, is anybody using DeepSeek in our company? Let me find it out. It was more of a security thing. Now people are like, okay, I'm using Kimi, I'm using GLM, I'm using all these open models. All these models are still served from American clouds. So it could be on Bedrock or it could be on Neo clouds, but they're open models, but there is less hesitation to use these models. Nemotron is excellent. Inkling is also excellent from Thinking Machines, but there is more openness to use it. This also brings the point of routing, which Bill just talked about, right? The routing becomes a critical layer to solve. And at least in the moment, there aren't really good solutions. There are a lot of sort of okay solutions, which still cut down 20% of the costs. But people the way, just to summarize, AI is here to stay. AI budgets are going to here to stay, but they need to be managed.
Yeah, I mean, we open sourced our agent foundry that does the routing, so people can download it for free. We put it out there if anyone's interested in that. So it also does security, agent security, and gives you policy control over agents. So that's another important piece. And we're working on automated reasoning to control the access of agents when they're doing mutations. But I would just continue to warn people about using the Chinese models. Not that I certainly experiment with them and understand what they do, but and if you don't care about your IP and you don't care about security, you don't care about backdoors, use the Chinese models. But if you care about those things, make sure you understand what they do and how they do it. There's a lot of information about that, and I think open weight models are great. I'm glad the Chinese are open weighting them. I'm glad Nemotron is open weight as well. But I think that's going to be the key. The other thing is you're going to see these big jumps as each model comes out, right? I mean, we're part of the Glasswing project, so we're doing a lot of the Mythos work as well, and understanding that. And that's, as you point out, it's really expensive. If Anthropic had not given us a certain number of tokens to use, it would be very expensive. So But the reality is that the GPUs at the back end in these data centers are not free either. They got to pay for all that, and in addition to their model work and all their training, it's just a massive amount of capital that goes into these things. So it has to be recouped somehow. I think it's going to be interesting to try to find, as each model comes out, what is going to be that sweet spot, though. Another model comes out and it does so much more. Well, what's going to be the sweet spot for that? And then if we can combine this physical AI with the large language models into a world model type experience where you get a real capability that's a next step function, what's that going to do, right? And I don't think we know yet. I think this is going to be, I think it's an exciting time. It's like every month or every week there's something different and new for us to go try. Started playing with, anthropic tags, which is like having a claw it's like having an employee that works for you. It's a claw basically for Slack, and you just like start slacking this thing that doesn't exist, that does work for you, and give it parameters. And I think the other thing that I always tell people who have not used AI is assume it would do it first. And then, and be pleasantly surprised or disappointed, one or the other. But start with the assumption it will do it rather than the assumption it won't do it.
Look back, we were talking about ROI in the early days. Did those early incentives to get folks engaged with AI, did that really, in the end, really help much at all? And looking at overall kind of look for how we're going with sustainability of cost in the here and now, are those kind of incentives even relevant? Are we moved on and you're recessing costs in different ways, different intervals that are not related to those early incentives that got organizations involved?
A lot of our programmers, we had a 20-minute rule. And so if they can't get it to write what you want in 20 minutes, you go write the code yourself. That was a year ago. Right, that was a year ago. That's kind of where we started, because you end up spending so much time prompting that and so much rework that it's not worth it. But that's no longer true. The models are getting so strong on coding that like I said, English is becoming the new programming language, and that really is a transformation in a big way. Right, you still have to specify it, you still have to guide it, you still have to control it, you still have to understand where it's going, you have to decide what policies you're going to put in place, what guardrails. But I think even asking the models to reduce their own token charges, they'll do that too, which is fascinating also, right? So you can say build this with the least number of tokens, but like when token masking started, I would have just told it write code without arrays. You imagine how much code you would write to read in a file into memory. You have to write one line for each line of the file. I mean, you'd use a massive amount of tokens and generate a huge amount of code. And so I think that's exactly the wrong thing to be asking, is use them. You want to be asking, get this done with the least amount of tokens, but do it well with the least amount of tokens is what you should be focused on.
Ameya, how about for you?
I think one thing I'll add here is that think about this, the changes that engineers and builders are going through. Right, this is the biggest change has happened, I would argue, since probably compilers. Essentially, we have to train all these hundreds and thousands of developers to a completely new way of building things, and nobody has any experience doing it. Like if you have building some shell scripts, you will have some person who's built Linux for 20 years and they'll be like, this is how you do it, right? There is no best practice, and the best practice is changing every 2 weeks, every new model release for all the engineers in the world at the same time, right? All the builders, I would say, just not engineers. So I think it's no surprise that we obviously made a bunch of mistakes, right? Whether it's token maxing or not, different companies made different kind of mistakes. But I think one of the biggest challenge even today, I think companies have not figured out yet, is that how do we train all these people on this new way of building? You're no longer writing the code and then it's just SDLC has changed, right? Bill mentioned about spec-driven development. That's a very different way of building things, right? And that's for today's models, right? 3 months from now, when GPT-6 is out or whatever, next Mythos 2.2 V2 is out, it may be something else. Now there used to be like a autocomplete to agent-driven development to spec-driven development. Now there's a loop engineering. It's changing every 2 months, right? Every 6 weeks. So I think that we'll still be in this flux for some more amount of time. We will burn a bunch of more tokens for some more amount of time. But remember, we are training our entire labor force on this new way of building that we have never seen before.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, I very much appreciate your thoughts on those questions. And I have, for those who are listening, I have raised the Ninja Turtles game screen, which means now it is time for Questable Ideas, our tabletop exercise where our panels will serve as interim executives at the fictional company called Questable Ideas. The scenarios were not shared in advance with the panelists and may be a bit over the top, but they do focus on today's topic. As always, my guests are not responsible for the presence of goblins, kobolds, gremlins, or gnomes in these scenarios. That is entirely my fault. So again, the ground rules, Bill and Ameya, you're used to this, but Bill, again, you're an interim executive. You have the same rights, privileges, and powers that you expect to have, with your role, up to and including calling in NASA and other special resources to deal with the shenanigans within the company. Gentlemen, are you ready for the scenarios?
Sure.
Okay. Scenario 1, maxed out. The CFO at Questable Ideas says overuse of external AI resources is pushing the company into the red. You've been tasked with crafting a new strategy to curb these costs, but there is a contingent of the staff, including engineers, who continue to token max. It's not just out of casual habit. Many of them no longer feel they can function without extensive use of AI, including your coders. The goblins propose, instead of cutting AI spending, shrink the cloud and SaaS budget, trim back identity and security measures. And do we really need all of those compliance measures and experts? Once everything is eventually automated through AI, we won't need any of that anyway. Do you adopt the goblins' plan as is, modify it, or do you start over from scratch?
Oh, I've got to go to what we're doing now in that situation is moving to open weight models, right, wherever we can. So I think you put a layer in between them and their model use that is routing the accesses to the models that are best in those areas. So you start to limit the models that are expensive, where you can use models that are not. And one way to do that is to put a layer in that fingerprints the prompts. And then you have a lot of the models now have fingerprints that you can get. And then you say, okay, based on your prompts, you can use this cheaper model and this cheaper model and this cheaper model. Another option, as we kind of mentioned, is to put some on-prem. I hate to say that coming from AWS because I say AWS, but putting some on-prem front end to capture some of the tokens without having to pay your cloud costs in those areas, and that can reduce some costs too. And you don't need a giant data center to do that. You can just have it almost in your network closet as you're connecting into the cloud to intercept some of that, and have a bunch of claws, if you like, Nemo claws running that you're running and controlled there to do that. With open source weighted models like Nemotron running at the front end. That's how I would start to reduce that.
I second Bill. Just to put the ground rules, there is no question of reducing compliance or security budgets. Mm-hmm. If anything, we probably actually need to increase it, as you saw with the Hugging Face incident just happened yesterday. I think the main thing here is that we are in this new world, and AI is going to work with humans, and humans are going to work with AI. That's a reality. So we have to stop being reactionary now. Right, we were reactionary in January. Maybe yes, we got all surprised. But now, if you're reactionary, we're just behind the game, right? So, okay, looking ahead, this is the coexistence world going forward. AI is going to continue to get better. It's going to get expensive. You can have tactical ideas, but it's going to get expensive. It's going to get you more productive. It's going to bring you an edge. So you have to put all this thing together in your business plan to look forward and find a way through it. You can always work with for tactical reasons for maybe another quarter, but at this point, it has to be a strategic objective. It has to be a part of a strategic plan, and live to coexist with it.
Yeah, and let me reemphasize what he just said around security. If it's not secure and available, none of the features matter. So that has to be the foundation that you base everything on. I think another thing you can do is ask the AI to reduce its cost. Like ask it what it would do to reduce its cost, and ask it to come up with scenarios to reduce its cost, because it can monitor those as well. You can do. I don't know if you ever use Klein, but Klein's pretty interesting. It shows you like how much each thing costs. So that's another thing you can do, is expose to the users how much each thing costs, because people start to react when they see, oh, gee, that prompt cost $8 and this other prompt cost 50 cents. Why did that Oh, it had to go out to the internet for that, and it had to do this, it had to do all these other things. Well, geez, if I asked it not to go to the internet, that would save a huge amount of money. And so by by exposing people to the cost in real time, they'll adjust their behavior, right, and know whether it's really worth spending that or not, right? It's just like any other, if you had an expense report, and you got to see what the actual expenses are, I think that's another way to do it as well.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well done on that. All right. Scenario 2, data delirium. The AI cost forecast looks rough for questionable ideas. The chief operating officer believes that by reducing physical presence and certain overseas markets, that could be a way to cover the budget gap. But this will raise issues with data compliance laws in some geographies, as you will also lose local expertise in those areas. The Gremlins propose using synthetic data generated by AI to mimic outputs from those lost regions, and that same AI would verify its own work in the process. The problem is that you'd have to scrub the most recent original data from those regions. The operations side is already reporting flawed outcomes because there are no updated resources for the synthetic data to model, and everyone with direct expertise with those original sources was let go. The Gremlins say the AI will adapt. Maybe no overseas presence will be necessary at all in the future. The AI can skim headlines and social media posts to adjust synthetic data in response to real-world events and potentially unverified posts. Do you continue with this plan, modify it, or start over from scratch?
That's a tough one. So I'm a huge advocate for synthetic data, by the way, but most of the time I'm using synthetic data around physical AI, because you just can't, if you want to train a robot to identify something, it's like 1.7 million images from all different angles and light, things like that. And you just can't take 1.7 million images. You can't run, if you want to train a car, you got to do 15 million miles of driving. You can do that in an hour in a simulated environment with synthetic data. You can't do that in the real world, right? So there's a lot of that happening there. There is a risk with simulated data, and especially on the data side, move away from physical eye to more the LLM side, of drift with your simulated data, right? So that you really need a lot of data scientists to be monitoring and managing your synthetic data generation to ensure that it's representative of the real world. And it sounds like we've laid off some of those people. That seems like a mistake.
All of them.
that seems like a mistake. I would hire back some of the people to be the experts in the synthetic data generation, but you wouldn't have to hire all of them back. I agree that AI can do a certain amount of it, right? But you're also going to be spending token charges on your synthetic data generation too. So you have to look at that, that balance as well.
I think big plus one to Bill. I think the key here is that, you need some grounding for synthetic data. So you can do synthetic data, but you need some grounding.
Right.
And in order to ground it, you need real data. So I wouldn't go from 0 to 100. So pick your spot for your particular example, what works for you, but it's certainly not 0, certainly not 100.
Right. Right. And I think, you'll see there's a service on AWS called Mechanical Turk. Do you know how that works?
It's actually going down, by the way, for this reason. So if you want like a real world view, just look at the growth of Mechanical Turk, and it's actually negative, right? So
yeah. So that's an interesting example. So I think there's a lot of advantage to synthetic data, but you can drift. It's sort of like, so we've been doing computational fluid dynamic estimation with an AI, and it's about 98% accurate. So that really accelerates your development of aerodynamic shapes and things like that in aircraft. But don't fly on an airplane designed by AI that's 98% accurate. I wouldn't. You still have to do the big HPC run and the wind tunnel run to validate it, right? But that 2% of the time, you could go down a rabbit hole with that 2% incorrectness. But the good news is you can run your HPC, find out it's wrong, then you feed that back into the AI so it never goes down that 2% again. And it just keeps getting better as you do it. But again, I think that's there's got to be caution with synthetic data. You still need to herd that. You still need people managing, looking at it, data scientists that understand the domain and are making sure you're not drifting.
All right, well done on that. All right, last scenario. Ransom ROI. The CFO and Chief Operating Officer for Questionable Ideas come to you looking pale as ghosts. It's the kobolds. They were entrusted with building up the AI resources for the company, which reduced costs in a number of areas, but there was no real gain in revenue from any new capabilities or functions. The company is growing, increasingly reliant on AI models they developed, but they have hoarded the knowledge and the remaining teams are ready to revolt. They want to develop a center of excellence so that they can learn from, how to operate with these models. But the kobolds claim it is cheaper for the company if only the kobolds understand the AI model. They just want you to pay them what they want and everything will be fine. Do you allow the kobolds to continue this way? Do you modify this arrangement, or do you give them the boot and rethink all of this?
I don't know. You can't boot them because you need them, but I think you put spies in there to exfil their experience, and then spread it back over the company.
I mean, by the way, this is outside of AI, right? Like there have always been people who have hoarded information. There have always been people who had specialized knowledge, and companies have dealt with it, right? I mean, like, of course, you have to take a pragmatic approach. First of all, you want to make sure that it doesn't happen in the first place. But if it happens, you have to figure out like how you actually get out of that place, right? So I think it's the same playbook that you would apply if somebody had a specialized knowledge and expertise, which is highly concentrated. It's part of your just planning your business continuity, making sure you're mitigating the risks and things like. It's not just like some people don't want to share it. Sometimes it's just knowledge is just so concentrated in very few people that it's a risk for the business, and that you just have to mitigate.
Yeah, I agree. It's just like managing any other risk in that area.
Gotcha. All right. Well done. All right. Well, Ameya, Bill, you've navigated Questionable Ideas, and I appreciate your insights on your overall look at reassessing and potentially recalculating your costs in the AI world. Listen, I thank you both so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
It was great fun. It's great to meet everybody, and I look forward to what's next.